Today, I'm excited to talk about Selby Jennings' newest specialized vertical, an area that no company, even outside of financial services, can do without. My guest is our first ever repeat guest on Searching Smarter, who manages our risk management and financial operations team, Anthony McCann. Every year at Selby Jennings, we survey thousands of financial sciences and services professionals across the USA to benchmark salaries, the benefits they receive, and which factors would cause them to leave their company or entice them to join a new firm. Over the course of the next 4 weeks, we will be releasing 8 mini episodes where we unpack the findings of this report with leading market experts from Selby Jennings. If you're interested in reading the full report, it is linked in the show notes of this episode and available at selbyjennings.com. Okay, we're back with our first two-time guest of Searching Smarter, Anthony McCann.
Pumped to be back for the second time. Must have means I did a somewhat of a good job the first time.
I'd say so. With regards to the bonus report and salary survey, FinOps not necessarily known to be the revenue generating teams or the ones who are taking home the biggest bonuses. But more recently, and from our respondents, would you agree that generally, FinOps candidates are pretty happy with, what their bonuses were for this year, with what their salary is for the, at the moment, and what their increases were, if any? Would you say that they were pretty happy?
Yeah, I would say they're pretty happy, right? I also think it's a pretty kind of like black and white and very pretty much this is what you get and this is what you're going to be making from a bonus perspective, right? And also you have to think about it. These people are also managing the finances on a day-to-day from the firm. So they kind of have a pretty good idea of how the business is doing, what they're making, and vice versa. So it is pretty standard, kind of across the board. And, I think for us, whether you're in the operations space, right, in accounting or kind of within the corporate finance area, I think it's pretty consistent from like a bonus and day-to-day perspective. And the only thing I think for us is that we'll see that some of the hedge funds and our buy-side clients pay maybe a little bit better or differently than some of our sell-side clients, depending on the role and function in that space and compared to a little bit other financial institutions.
Is that because generally, obviously, on the buy side, bonuses can become greater for various reasons and the amount of money that they're managing or what have you. Would you say that's primarily bonus heavy in FinOps as well, or is it base heavy for the hedge funds too?
Yeah, I would say like the bonus is maybe just a little bit higher, but obviously it's not like a drastic one, right? Unless you're obviously talking about kind of like more executive level CFOs, treasurers, chief accounting officers and COOs, right? Those type of functions, broadly speaking to the mid to senior level, like their bonuses are pretty consistent. I just think on the buy side, it tends to be a bit higher, right? And I think that's just broadly a pay on the buy side is typically a bit more because there's less people than some of the Southside institutions, right? And then obviously, the amount of money they're managing and vice versa. So I think that's been a pretty big drastic one when you kind of look at that, from a standpoint. And I think obviously for us, it's been awesome to kind of get into the weeds a bit more and really have a lot of discussions and conversations with, the executives in the space, but also even the general candidates across these markets. And I think it's been, definitely unique. And we have obviously a lot of data points and from just last 6 months to a year, just from all the other offices that we have covering it, plus also the verticals that we're, doing it within, right? So I think it's definitely unique. And obviously we already have a lot of the clients that work with us in other spaces. So it's been, very nice to kind of tell them about our finance and accounting team now. And I think we've started to see a lot of traction already on the back of that. And because of that, been able to get a lot more insight data points of what's kind of going on and how they typically handle and navigate things.
That's a great point, and consistent with obviously what we've seen. Buy side always generally pays better in various ways. So totally fair. Now, with regards to candidate movement, would you say that candidates generally are happy in their roles? Are there is a lot of the movement growth hiring in the FinOps space right now? Is it regulatory based? Is it the fact that they received a bonus that they were happy with and might feel the need to move on? What are you seeing? Is compensation? I guess the question would be: is compensation a driver for the candidate movement that you're seeing right now, and is there a lot of that?
Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, finance and accounting is a massive space, right? And a massive amount of employees in it. So I think it's a good mix across it, right? What drives their hiring needs is much different than what drives, some of our other verticals that we are in, right? So I think that's always something to kind of, think about, when we're assessing the markets. Is it driven by regulatory needs? I don't think that is as much, right? When you're thinking about hedge funds, why do they need more people or our buy-side clients within their finance account department? So I think obviously there's always firms that are growing, firms that are launching. If you're launching a fund, right, you need people within your finance and accounting department or your operations team, right? A lot of general, broader movements across the business. But I wouldn't say that just one size fits all. I think money is always going to be a motivating factor, right, for anyone that when they make a move. But I think also like a lot of people in this core vertical tend to want to make sure that they're also driven by like what's going to give them a long-term growth and benefit. How are they going to get to view the business and whatnot? Because there's a lot of, CFOs that take unique routes to get there, right? There's not like one set career path. And I kind of think the similar from a COO perspective and whatnot. So I think that stuff, and when it comes to controllers or, any type of accounting functions. So some people start off with public accounting and then move into industry, right? That's a lot of, what we see in the, earlier stages, maybe 3 to 4 years experience. And then from there, obviously they can dictate kind of their career growth and what they're kind of do. So
The Big Four is still the Big Four, and a public accounting and consulting background still holds its weight. Absolutely. Always has.
Yeah. And obviously once you're kind of in there, I think the biggest, thing for us is obviously clients like to hire from similar types of clients and institutions, right? And that's always going to be the case. And I think the biggest thing that our clients need to realize is how they can separate themselves compared to where else they might be working and what visibility, what opportunities, what are they going to learn that they might not be able to learn right now, right? In their current role, and how can they grow? And what does that next 3 to 5 years look for that candidate? I think is always going to be pretty important, from that standpoint. So every client that we work with will have a finance and accounting team and an operations team. Obviously, depending on the size, will depend how big that firm's team is. But there's always a crucial need, and you're going to need it, right? And it's a market where you need to be standing out amongst the crowd, but also to get the best talent, right? There isn't a drastic difference in sometimes of what they're doing in their current role compared to where they're going. So you need to make sure you're bringing an attractive slate, and that can be based around compensation. It could be around, work flexibility, but also it's more around, kind of what impact they can make on the business and how they can grow, right? I think is always going to drive that.
Just to wrap things up here, what are you seeing as far as benefits are concerned, or the work flexibility specific to the FinOps sector, right? Do you, given that it is truly an operational vertical, are you seeing that the flexibility is more, that, candidates either are looking for more chances to work from home more, or that generally, if a firm is known for being 4 or 5 days in, but the finance and accounting teams are only, 2 or 3, what is the return to office looking like? What are the mandates for the recs that we're supporting looking like, and the expectations for candidates in this space?
Yeah. So I think, obviously within financial services, I think they kind of stay similar to what the firm is actually doing, right? Like if they're 3 days in the week in the office, is probably very similar to that from that standpoint, or 2 days a week, remote flexibility, what it be. I think there's a lot more maybe openness to this standpoint, but there's definitely a lot of our clients where people in their finance account team are in the office. That's, aspects throughout the week. Seems to be a lot more flexibility and openness, like broadly speaking, though, to these teams, and kind of depending on what function where they're doing. But I think, obviously there's also so many small firms that we work with in this space too, because, they have a finance and accounting function where they might be more interested in like this 30-person shop wants everyone in the office 5 days a week, right? So it really is client dependent. But I think, broadly speaking, that it is a pretty, flexible arrangement. But I do think, from a culture perspective and whatnot, a lot of people do like to at least have people in the office to build that rapport and relationships and help the business kind of ultimately, grow.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Totally good points. So then I think just my last question from your perspective, more generally, is there, if you had a piece of advice for candidates in the FinOps space, or insights, for candidates, or as well as companies who might be hiring, on things to look for, if you had just like a single point for either side, the candidate side and the hiring side, what would your take and kind of parting words be?
Yeah, I think from a client perspective, right, making sure that you stand out and what you actually want, what their career could look like in 3 to 5 years. Make sure that you're obviously assessing and paying fair, equitable to the market. And I think really defining on why the role is open and what they can actually do in the role and impact they actually can make on the business. And I think from a candidate perspective, right, I think making sure that when you're coming to market, you really have a good understanding of where you're coming from, right? A lot of firms want to see someone in their finance accounting department that understands their business, right? And understands what to do. So coming from a similar institution definitely plays a big factor in helping you be able to stand out amongst the crowd. I think it's really difficult if you had no exposure to what that business does and how they make money and what they're kind of in, how you're going to be able to maybe move in, even if you have great finance and accounting skills, because you don't maybe understand the business as much. And I think from a candidate perspective, also just remember, it is a competitive market. So like, how are you going to stand out? And also making sure that you also understand what you're trying to get out of your career. And, there isn't always a full defined path to CFO, right? Or, COO, right? And I think it's making sure that you're enhancing as much skill set as you possibly can and making sure that you understand how the business makes money, establishing relationships, rapport, but also being, really good at your job of finance and accounting, right? And be able to articulate yourself in a way that makes you come across commercially.
That's all for today's episode of Searching Smarter. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, keep searching smarter.